Hey y'all, I'm Hope. Welcome back to my channel. The weather has finally started to get really cold where I'm at, and it definitely feels like winter is setting in. So that's gotten me thinking about wintry books and things that I like to read in the winter, and I thought it would be fun today to give you guys some winter book recommendations. This is going to be kind of an eclectic mix of things because I chose these books based on whether they had either kind of a snowy or icy setting, whether they made me think of winter through kind of their themes or the writing or anything like that, if they mentioned winter explicitly in the story or if that was like a central part of the story. So there's kind of a weird mix of stuff here, and I feel like it represents kind of the weird mix of stuff that I generally read. But yeah, these are all books that I think are in some way very wintry and that I think would be great to pick up during this season. The first one is a classic, and this is partially because I like to read classics in the winter. I don't know why that is, but I also think this classic has some good kind of wintry settings in it as well. So the first book I've got to recommend is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I feel like a lot of people recommend this as a spooky book because of the, zombie making element of it, and I very much feel like this is a spooky book for sure. This is great for spooky season, but I think it carries over nicely into winter as well because there's a lot of this book that is first of all set in kind of wintry settings. A lot of it is like in the Swiss Alps. Portions of the book are set in the Arctic Circle as well, and I also think thematically it's interesting because there's a lot of themes around loneliness and solitude, and a lot of that is what drives some of the character choices made by both, it drives some of the choices made by both Victor and the monster. So I think that kind of lends itself thematically to being a winter book. The next two I picked are both mysteries, and I think that this first one, I picked it in part because, like Frankenstein, I think some of its themes feel wintry. They have a lot to do with loneliness, and trying to find a place in the world, and that feels very wintry to me just because everything is so quiet and cold during the season. But this one is The Silence of Bones by June Her. This is the story of Seol, who's a young girl who is indentured to the police service in the capital of Joseon, Korea, during the 1800s. She gets involved in the investigation of the murder of a noblewoman, and at the same time is trying to figure out what happened to her missing brother, who several years ago left their family's home, and they've not heard from him since, so she thinks something must have happened to him because he had promised to write and he never has. So she's got just a hand drawing of her brother that she is carrying around trying to find him. So I feel like a lot of this book is very quiet and still, which makes me think of winter. It is a very slow-moving book that's a character study of Seol and also of the inspector that she's working with throughout the book, kind of her getting to understand him because he's an unusual kind of character. So it's a lot of quiet, slow-moving character work that I think is really rewarding when you read it. Also, this does take place, I think, in the latter part of the year, and there's some sections of the book that take place, on an icy mountain. But I just think this is a delightful one to read, and also this one made me cry a lot. This is a book that is, as much about family as it is about the mystery, and I really liked the way that June Her wove those two elements together, and it genuinely made me sob at the end. I finished reading this, and I had to kind of sit at my desk and just cry for a little bit, because this is just a really beautifully written book. The next pick is much more straightforward. This is Think of a Number by John Burden, and I don't know if you can see it, but there's literally snow on the cover. But this one is set kind of in the late fall going into winter in the Catskill Mountains in New York. And it's about this guy who's retired. He's a police detective. He's retired, living in the mountains with his wife. And then he gets drawn into a mystery when a friend of his receives an unusual letter asking him to think of a number. And that sets off a chain of events that lead Detective Gurney to get involved in a bigger investigation because people have been receiving weird letters like this and then getting killed. And so that's basically the setup, but there's an entire puzzle in this book that's based on snow. There's a bit where there's a snowy landscape and they have to try and piece together what happened based on the evidence left in the snow, and I think that was really interesting. I also just really like this book because it's got a really I think clever solution. I feel like it lays out all of the clues for you so you can figure it out on your own if you want to. But I really like the solution for this one. I feel like it's simple enough that like it's not an overly convoluted villain plot. It's a very clever thing that once it's revealed, you immediately get it. But I do love the like elements of this that are set in winter and the way that John Verdon uses that as like a part of the puzzle of the story. So the last two things I have to recommend are all fantasy books, and I think I'll start with the kind of shortest and kind of darkest of the three first. So this is Winter's Dawn by Arden Powell. This is a fantasy romance book that is set in winter in England, but in a version of England where there's like magicians and they have various different kinds of magic, and it follows a guy who gets arrested for treason or something. I don't actually remember what his crime is, or his accused crime, and he gets locked up in this prison for magicians. He's mostly a theoretical magician. He works in like mathematics and theory, but they lock him up in this prison, and he ends up kind of forming a friendship and later a relationship with the person on the other side of the wall of his cell, because somebody prior to them has like carved out a hole in the wall and like pulled one of the bricks out so that they can talk across that wall. And he gets involved talking to this person on the other side named Winter, and Winter is an interesting character. I don't want to give too much away because this is a very short book, and I think that some of the revelations that occur across it are interesting. But for the most part, this is really just a like quick, fun read. It's got some darker themes than Arden Powell's other work, but like still, it's not like a super heavy book. And I think that some of the revelations we have about the main character and his involvement with the way the English government deals with magicians is really interesting. But this also has a character who has ice magic, and I think that that makes it very wintry. And I think it's also set during the winter, so. So the next one I have is The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison, one of my all-time favorite books. And I want to recommend this to everyone all the time, always, because my goal in life is to get as many people to read this as possible. I love this book. I think it's brilliant. I think that it's a book you can come back to again and again. But I picked this one because there is actually a central part of this story that revolves around winter. The book starts, I think, like a month or two before winter. It's like in the fall, and a good chunk of the first half of the book is leading into this big event that's going to happen at winter solstice. The main character's birthday also happens to be the same day as the solstice, so there's this kind of lead up to that and then fallout from there. So I think that the winter solstice is kind of a big deal for this, and I like the way that it's woven in. It's not just like an event that happens. There's a lot of stuff leading up to it that's important. It's kind of all spiraling towards this one event. The other reason I chose this is that I think that this is a really good example of cozy fantasy, which I notice is really popular right now. A lot of people are recommending like Legends and Lattes, which I still need to read. It sounds fantastic. But people are recommending that and some other cozy fantasies, and I think that this would count as a cozy fantasy. This is about Maya, who unexpectedly becomes the emperor of the Elven Empire, despite being a half-goblin. His father, the emperor, and his older brothers all suddenly die in an airship crash, and so he unexpectedly becomes the emperor and has to learn how to lead in this society that he knows like basically nothing about. But I love that Maya is very much like a cinnamon roll character. He just cares for people, and that's what drives a lot of his decisions in this book. It's very much about Maya being compassionate and wanting to do the right thing for as many people as possible and to make his world a better place, because the world of this story is really like a deeply fucked up place. There's a lot of oppression and this kind of sense that like this is just the way things are, this is how things have always been done, and Maya comes in and starts to kind of question that, and I think that that's really interesting, and it's very cozy as well because Maya doesn't really go anywhere. This is, unlike a lot of fantasy stories, this is not about somebody like going on an adventure and solving problems. Maya is pretty much confined to his palace, and a lot of the book just takes place in like different rooms of the palace, which are all like really beautifully described, but it's this kind of coziness in that like Maya has a little set of friends that start to form around him and help him as he goes through learning how to be the emperor, but there's also like a claustrophobia to it in that Maya can never really leave. So I think this is just an interesting version of cozy fantasy. I don't know that this would have, necessarily been marketed as that when it first came out, but I feel like it will, you know, scratch that itch for people now that who have like read Legends and Lattes are really wanting more of that kind of cozy, non-adventuring fantasy. So I really like this one, and obviously I can ramble about it for ages, but I just like that it's got kind of winter as a central event in it. And then the last book I have is an incredibly obvious pick, but this is a childhood favorite of mine, and the dust jacket is trying to escape. This is The Legend of Holly Claus by Brittany Ryan and Laurel Long. This was a book that I've read every year at Christmas for several years when I was younger, and this one follows the daughter of Santa Claus. The setup for this is that Santa Claus receives a letter one year asking him what does he want for Christmas, and apparently the answer is a child. But because of his receiving this letter, Holly is born, but upon being born, she's immediately cursed by an evil magician who wants to basically ruin Santa's life, and he curses her so that her heart is ice, and so she gets warm, she'll actually die. And I believe he wants her to marry him as like ultimate punishment for Santa for whatever. I don't genuinely remember what this guy's whole deal is. I just remember that he's creepy and he's evil, and that's it. But he curses Holly and she has to be kept cold, and then this book kind of follows her from being a child and dealing with that through to being a young woman and wanting to like go out into the world and meet people and kind of learn what humanity is like, because she's never gotten a chance to do that. So that's that story. She also has some really cute animal companions. I think you have the wolf on the cover. It's one of the companions. But there's, I think, like 3 or 4 animal companions that happen in here. There's also a character who is a toy maker. There's a bit of a romance between Holly and another character that's really sweet. Kind of grumpy sunshine kind of romance. And I like the ending of this book a lot. I think that the conclusion of how they deal with the villain is, it's kind of cheesy, but like, it's sweet. And I have always liked how this book ends. So I just love everything about this book. It's like a holiday classic for me that I've read a lot of times. It's been a while now since I've read it, but I just love that this is kind of a wintry fantasy. And I think there's just a really pretty book as well. This book has like these beautiful illustrations. Let's see. There's like that. So it's full of all of these beautiful illustrations, and I just think that it's a lovely read. These plus an ebook are my kind of favorite winter recommendations. I know this is kind of a weird stack of things, but these are all books that I think about reading in the winter, or that I have read in the winter and kind of associate with it. But yeah, that's all I have for you today. Let me know what your favorite wintry books are down in the comments below. I'd love to hear your recommendations. I'm always looking for new seasonal reads for the winter. And if you like this video, I hope you'll give it a like and maybe even consider subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting every Tuesday and Saturday, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.